Welcome to you all, whether you're in the room or on Zoom. I'm Janet Reyes, the Geospatial Information Librarian, and presenting this workshop, Introduction to Aerial Photo Interpretation, for the first time. So thank you for joining me today. This is also the first time we're presenting a hybrid workshop where we have some people in the room and some people joining on Zoom. And also, it's the first workshop where we'll be attempting to use Zoom annotation for those of you who have devices and would like to give it a try. So all of these new things to try out, hopefully it'll all go well. I think it will. I have a helper today. Her name is Daisy. She's in another room right now, but she'll be helping me monitor the chat because I don't have a good view of what's going on in the chat and so forth. And she'll also be posting messages into the chat for you as well as we go along. So there's that housekeeping. This workshop is being recorded, and if the recording comes out well, in a week or two, it should be posted on the library's YouTube channel for you to review. If you have registered for this workshop, I have your email address, and I will be sending you a copy of the slides that we're using today. They include some links that you might find helpful, so that's one reason to take a look at the slides when you do receive them. At the end, we're going to ask you to maybe fill out an evaluation of this workshop. Very brief. You just get to pick one question and answer it if you choose to. That'll really help me understand how well this went for you, or if there's anything I need to adjust in the future. So with that, let's move along. Start with the UCR land acknowledgement. We'd like to respectfully acknowledge our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseno, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. It seems especially relevant to give this land acknowledgement today when we're talking about aerial photo interpretation and what we see on the ground over time, and realizing that things have definitely changed over time as well. So here's what we'll cover today. Starting out with an introduction, value of interpreting aerial imagery, like why do we even bother doing something like this? Then we get into some of the fun parts where I have photo examples for you, and we can talk through what we're seeing or what we think we see, or how we would distinguish one item on the photo from another, that kind of thing. Then deciding on a category, like once we've identified what the thing is, what would we call it if we were in a more comprehensive mapping effort? What category would we put it in? Sometimes it's tricky to set the boundaries. We think something should be very clear-cut, but perhaps it isn't always the case. So we'll take some looks at examples of that. Recognizing that changes over time may impact what we do when we interpret aerial photos. Toward the end, I'll just briefly cover if you were going to set up an aerial photo interpretation mapping effort, what kind of things would you want to think about before you really got going on that project. And then finally, a couple of slides that have some resources for you if you want to follow up on what you've learned today. So let's start with thinking about why would somebody even bother learning about doing this? Well, we'll start with a very brief history. So by the 1920s, when airplanes were kind of a steady thing, not the bi-wing sort of things that the Wright brothers flew and that, somebody came up with the idea of if we mount a camera in the belly of the airplane pointing straight down at the surface, and somebody takes pictures as it flies along, and it flies in a methodical kind of mowing the grass sort of pattern, then we can get complete photo coverage of an area that way. This illustration I found shows that if the picture was snapped at this position, it might cover all of this area. If the next photo was snapped here, so it covers much of the same area plus a little bit more. They're calling it end lap here. I'm used to calling it overlap. Typically that's 60%. So what this does is, number one, ensure that there's complete coverage of the ground surface. And number two, it enables stereoscopic vision. So if you were in the room, in the back, I have a stereoscope set up with a couple of old aerial photos. And if you look through it and it works for you, you can see the hills pop up in 3D for you. So that was one method that was used for a long time in interpreting aerial photos. In the 1950s, we started getting satellites launched into space. And in the 60s, that's when they started, I believe, putting cameras and other sensors on the satellites so that they can take images of the ground surface. And that, of course, both of these things are still going on today. People still acquire aerial photos by flying in planes. These days, they even use drones, right? That's going to be the next big thing. And of course, satellites are still up there circling around, imaging our planet as well, giving us lots and lots of sources for aerial photography and imagery. So here's the first kind of fun thing to think about. On the left, you see a map. It's an excerpt from Google Maps of a city block in Riverside, not too far from campus. And you can see that it has some helpful information on it. It has street names for one thing, and you can see all the streets that are in existence. You see Google has called out a couple of businesses or enterprises or shops or whatever. It's labeled a park. But then look at the same area on a Google Earth imagery view on the right-hand side. There's a lot more information on that photograph, isn't there? And I want us to think about for a second, what else could be extracted from this photo that you're not seeing on the Google map? And think about it in terms of if you were a city planner or maybe somebody interested in like what happens to water in the event of a storm, or maybe you're interested in the electrical grid, things like that. What kind of things can you tell from the image that you can't tell from the existing map? Anybody in the room want to? Yeah.
Zoning, the top right corner looks to be commercial versus the general top half being residential. So you might infer that that's zoned a particular way.
Absolutely. Definitely different land uses going on, or we would assume, right? that this would be a different use from all of these. I think along the bottom street here, we also see some different looking buildings, but they're also not looking like the majority of the buildings here. So that's one absolutely type of information you can extract. Can anybody think of any others?
There's an area with no buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Inventory of trees.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's kind of a big thing these days. I don't know if you've heard about the concept of urban heat islands and how much tree canopy there are. This does not strike me as a block that has lots and lots of trees. So that would be interesting to maybe correlate with some heat measurements and see if that's the case compared to some other leafier parts of town. I mentioned like water. One thing, there's a term called impervious surface, which is basically if it's paved over. Mm-hmm. So when we have a storm like we did last week, if the water cannot soak into the ground immediately, engineers and things have to think about where's that water going to go. So there's that kind of consideration. I'm thinking about the roofs of these buildings. Does that trigger an idea for anybody? If we could zoom in, we might be able to see whether they have solar, and so you can see which ones don't have solar. And, if you were interested in that kind of thing. So that just gives you an example of like for this urban setting, there's several different things that we could extract from the imagery that somebody may not have mapped before, right? If we had a more, a setting that was away from development, there would be a different set of things that we might, figure out, like we could look at the landforms or the vegetation, maybe surface geology kind of things. So there's really a lot of potential information that can be extracted. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of different applications. So this is just a partial list of the kinds of things that people have used aerial photo interpretation for in the past. I just want to call out a few of them. Vegetation and land use, land cover are the ones I'm most familiar with. And today we'll be mostly looking at examples of land use, land cover because for one thing, I think it's something we're all familiar with. We understand there's residential uses and agricultural uses and that. So there's no learning curve on thinking about what we're looking at. But I want to point out too, for history, I linked to an article that was in the UCR magazine in spring, where a group of 3 historians from UCR were looking for inholdings and homesteads around the Joshua Tree National Park area. And the article said, and I can attest that this is true, that among the other sources, they came to our library and looked at the aerial photograph collection that we have here to try to see if they could identify some of these structures from the 1950s. So there you go. You can obviously see, like, when you have change over time and you have a series of photographs over time, you can learn a lot about what has happened in the area. I also want to call out military national security. One of the biggest uses of aerial photo interpretation in the last century was in 1962 or 3, it was the Cuban Missile Crisis. That whole thing got started because there was an aerial photo interpreter who noticed something weird was being built in Cuba, right? And we went from there. So yeah, many, many applications of doing this. But whatever application you have, there's some basic tasks or objectives when you're interpreting an aerial photograph. You want to identify what a ground feature is, like what is this thing I'm looking at? Once you've identified it, you need to decide what category it belongs in, if in your mapping scheme, if that's what you're doing. Sometimes it could be just, it's what I want to capture, or it isn't. Like, this is a Joshua tree, the rest of the things are not Joshua trees, and that's all I care about. But other times it might be, you know, many more categories that you're interested in as well. Then you have to figure out how to capture the feature. I mean, you could.
I mean, my VCR.
Okay, somebody needs to mute. Okay. Capturing the feature, like, you might want to capture it as a point, a line, or a polygon. A polygon is a shape or an area. And then often we're not just capturing presence or absence, but we're also capturing more information about the feature. Like, say we're thinking about saguaro cactuses in Arizona. We could look at the imagery and say, yes, that's a saguaro, but maybe you want some information about whether it's a young one, a medium-sized one, or a really tall one. You might want to know how many arms it has. You might want to know whether it's like basically burned or standing dead, you know, all of those kind of things. So each of those things might be something else that you want to capture in addition to, yes, that's a thing, and this is what the thing is. So now we get to the fun part. We're going to start looking at photographs and see what kind of clues we can pick up to help us decide what the things are. It's not always as easy. I wish it were. Love it when buildings have signs on top telling you what they are, but that's pretty rare. So what we do use is what's called an aerial photo signature, which is, you can see the definition at the top here, the characteristic appearance of a ground feature or collection of features on a given type of imagery. And when I talk about a collection of features, let's think maybe about, say, a university campus. You know, there's a bunch of buildings, but there's also other things like walkways and some athletic fields and things like that, that together, as we look at this collection of features, we go, ah, that's a college or university, you know, that kind of thing. That's what we're talking about regarding collection. So all of these characteristics of the photo are things that we can use to try to figure out what we're looking at. I'll just point out, some of them are obvious, some of them are a little less so. Shadow is really great because that gives you an idea of how tall something is, whether it's got some height to it at all or not. Proximity means, like, this is a thing and it could be I have a few different choices on what I think it might be, but because it's next to this other thing, now I'm going to say it's, you know, it's this category. So that's all helpful too. And then definitely geographic location is important. There are things that look different on the East Coast than they do on the West Coast. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a little bit, for instance. And then image characteristics. And here's what I mean by image characteristics. Technology has changed over time and our images have gotten sharper and sharper, but even so, it depends on the camera, it depends on a lot of things as far as how crisp your image is and how well you can see the features that are on the image. Resolution is another kind of term for that. And image scale is obviously if it's a photo taken a long time ago, they took it at a certain scale, like 1 inch on the ground equals, or 1 inch on the photo equals, 2,000 feet on the ground or something like that. It's fixed. You can't zoom in and out like you can with Google Earth and things like that. Sun angle and the effects on shadows can be important. I'll talk briefly about color bands. We're all pretty familiar with natural color. That's the visible spectrum, red, green, and blue. And this is an image taken near Tejon, over by the Grapevine in Southern California. This is the same image in color infrared, where we've shifted the bands from still including some of the visible, but also the near infrared now. And what that does is render the vegetation in these shades of magenta, and that helps people who are interpreting vegetation in particular understand how robust the plant life is. And then, in the old days, of course, all we had to go by is black and white. It's also referred to as panchromatic. And this is an example of some satellite imagery. I couldn't get a good satellite view of this whole area, but it's like kind of this upper corner of this image, and this image is what we're seeing here in this black and white. And then cloud cover can be a challenge, especially if you're interested in an area that's, say, tropical or like is under cloud cover a lot of the time. It can be pretty hard to find a cloud-free image. So here's where we get to some participation on your part if you choose, if you have a device and you would like to try to use Zoom annotation. Sorry, what you can do is go up to, if you see view options at the top of your screen, and click on that, and there's a drop down, and then you would pick annotate. If you do that, you should see kind of a taskbar or a menu bar that looks like this. First thing you would want to do, if you choose to do this, no obligation at all, you might want to go to the format and then pick one of these colors. They're really bright. They'll stand out against the photography. And you can choose any one of these 4 line widths that you would like. And then after that, when it gets to drawing, you would want to come over here and, click draw. And then it gives you the option of drawing a straight line or like a freehand line. And when you, somebody wrote hi. You're trying it out. That's very good. Then when you do that, you start by just holding down your left mouse button or the equivalent and keeping it down until you're ready to finish the line, and then you just lift your finger and that ends the line. So yep, everybody's given it a try. That's really good. I have the power to erase all of your lines. So that's what I'm going to do now. Clear all drawings. Okay, and now we can move on to the next slide. Right. So I've picked a couple of features that are fairly distinctive. Anybody in the room want to tell me what they think is on either the left or the right side?
It's obviously an airport.
On the left, you think it's an airport? Yep. No, this is back in Delaware, or yeah. Both of these are from the East Coast. Any ideas on what we have on the right?
Definitely a golf course.
Okay, that's right. That's right. So we've got an airfield on the left and a golf course on the right. I can pause now for a second on this slide if anybody would like to try to show us all where you think the boundaries would go around either one of these features. Because sometimes it seems like it's obvious, but then you get to a point, it's like, wait a minute, should I include this part as well? Or, for instance, some of these down here at this end of the airport or airfield, I'm not sure where I would necessarily cut it off. I might need to look at it a little more closely. I'm not sure if some of these buildings over here are associated with it. So, okay, don't see anybody giving it an attempt right now, but anyway, you get the idea. There you go. Somebody's got it. Yeah, Crystal filled it in. And I would think, you know, these trees probably belong to the golf course. So that might be one thing you would wonder, do I need to like not include these trees? But I think you can see there's a path going through there. So it probably does all belong to the golf course. Yes, there's a question mark up there. Okay, so I'll go ahead and clear that now. Oops, somebody else has got something.
And can we
going on.
see what's going on with the other people, or do we just get the static slides? Just the slides?
Oh, you're not seeing the, oh,
I think your cursor doesn't show.
oh,
I can see it through Zoom.
okay, I didn't realize that.
It's okay. I just thought I was missing something.
No, obviously I was missing something, not realizing that you weren't seeing what I was seeing.
And I thought those were static slides.
Yeah. Okay. I wonder how I fix that. Let me think. I'll go on to the next slide in the meantime. So this is another chance for those of you who would like to try it on Zoom. We have two types of buildings on this image. I would like to hear from you on what you think the two types are. And then if anybody would like to delineate on the image, separating one from the other, that's okay too. Any ideas?
I would say apartments, condominiums on the left side, probably 3 different groupings, and then on the right would be single family homes. Just
Yes.
based on the style and the coloring and the general shapes.
Tract homes, very small yards,
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, that's absolutely
not
right.
very big trees, so it's probably recent.
yeah.
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 They are indeed single family homes. And on the right-hand side and on the left, we have a few different sets of apartment complexes. What are some of the clues that you used to think that those were apartments?
The shape of, for example, the terracotta, that triangular section in the middle, they have a community pool,
Mhm.
usually positioned in the center, similar shape. A lot of like common space features.
Buildings are all pretty much the same shape, so that,
Yeah.
you know, the rentals will be, you know,
Mhm.
same square footage.
Yeah,
Yep. You also see some parking, right?
right.
In fact, these guys are probably covered parking, right? These
Oh.
rectangular things.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so there's not too many other things this could be. You know, sometimes there's like commercial complexes where you walk from building to building and can go to shops, but the fact that there's the pools and a lot of covered parking and things, that pretty much all points to apartments or some kind of multifamily thing going on.
The shadow, if I may say,
Yeah.
the shadowing that you mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
I don't know really how to interpret shadows, but it is a little bit higher on the apartment complexes that kind of compared to the single family homes. So it looks like those would be 2-level, 3-level at the most compared to the single family homes that are probably 1 story at most or 2.
That's a great point. Yep. True. Okay. And okay. Another set of features. They all have something in common, but they are different from each other as well.
It looks like an elementary, a middle school, and a high school.
That is correct. If you didn't hear that over Zoom, Sarah said this is elementary school, middle school, and high school. What clues did you use?
Well, the elementary school does not have a large athletic field, and it has like Foursquare and you know, the kids' games.
Mhm.
And the buildings are kind of closer together and also have not a lot of parking because kids don't drive themselves.
Yes, and you notice it has those lovely pull-throughs that
Yes.
parents love and honk at each other.
Yes.
Time to pick up kids.
Yeah. And the junior high is a bit bigger, but not so much bigger. The buildings are kind of more, they're larger, but plain.
Mhm.
And I don't know if there's what is that? There's no modules, you know, the temp modules that
Mhm.
you see everywhere,
Mhm.
but you see those on the other one with the bigger field and logo, and there's pools, tennis courts.
Mhm.
Is this my high school?
The quality of the fields too.
Yeah.
Right, like we have a football field here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a football field.
But you have
In
a
the-
bare minimum track and then.
Right.
Because you still have to do the damn thing.
Yeah, the wildland.
Oh,
Yes, absolutely. So,
High schools typically only segregate their levels of athletics by junior varsity, so having two baseball fields, two softball fields.
mhm.
mhm.
All very good clues, yes.
But I don't see a soccer field.
No. So doing well here. Here's something, yeah. What I see are parked cars, and I'm wondering if these are all the same type of feature.
Isn't the one on the left have parking structures? There's height to them.
There's height to them.
Yeah.
I will show you the next slide. And you're right. So this is downtown Los Angeles.
I was like, I parked there somewhere.
So if we go back to the previous slide, you can see some shadow. So you guys are picking up on the shadow thing. Although honestly, the first time I saw this, I just thought it was a weird looking parking lot, you know, these kind of things. And my case is, if there's a lot of people are saying, well, computers can do this kind of work now, and computers can classify images. I am hoping that when they train the computers for parking lot, that they would take in some examples that have some height to them, and you know, make the classification of the object a little more accurate, because I looked at Street View and there are all storefronts along here. So they're really, if you were thinking about what this building is used for, it's not used for parking. It's used for commercial enterprises, and they just happen to park on the top. This building over here is actually a parking structure for the city of Los Angeles. So this is going to be cars from top to bottom, but it's, you know, it's not a parking lot like the image we saw on the right is. So anyway, sometimes you got to pay attention to those things that just look a little bit weird and try to figure out if this is really the thing. This is a little bit trickier. This is in Southern California as well. Any guesses on what kind of feature this is?
It's a park.
It does look like a park.
I mean,
Yes.
it's got the high water tower, although they're not technically towers.
Yeah. Somebody else who saw this image thought it might be like when they reclaim a landfill. Sometimes but that's not what this is. I will show you an example from the East Coast, and then I think you will understand what this one is.
If it was in overflow water.
Oh, it's a cemetery.
It's a cemetery. Yeah.
Well, those are kind of like parks. People used to do picnics.
Yes. But you know, these days the headstones are not. I mean, they're just mostly not there at all. But on the East Coast, when you've got older cemeteries and that.
Was the other one Forest Lawn?
This one is this is Barton Road here, so this is like Montecito, I guess.
Oh.
Yeah. Hi, welcome. Yeah, so that's an example of something that's a little bit trickier. A couple things it could have been, we did reason it through. But yeah. Okay, so now we're going to think quickly about deciding on categories. Like maybe you can decide what it is, but then where do you put it in your classification on your map? So here, talking about similar signatures, I'm focused in particular on these green areas, and this is Southern California. Here's where I would want to know what time of year this was taken, because if this was taken from, say, late May to November, if these are vacant areas, they're going to be brown, right? You know, but they could be, like this one especially, you seem to have that pattern of rows. Now it could be somebody who's just trying to mow the weeds and keep it, you know, it's pretty much effectively a vacant area, not being used for agriculture, but maybe they're just mowing it. Or it could be, you know, a vacant area. It could possibly be pasture, you know, used for grazing horses or something like that. So there's a lot of possibilities. If I saw these same things in a vast area that was definitely agriculture, you know, I would just go ahead and say they're probably agriculture too. But these things are really tricky and often require follow-up, like actually driving out there and taking a look and seeing if you can figure it out. Fallow fields are also a tricky thing because it is used for agriculture for part of the year, but the rest of the time it looks like a vacant field. So there's some choices there. Does anybody know what these things are?
We can't see.
Oh, yeah. Does anybody know what these things are?
You mean the groves?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Those are citrus groves, yeah.
Are those the smudge pots in between that line?
That I don't know. This is a contemporary photo, so I'm thinking they still use them. Yeah. Okay. Next up, we have multiple uses, which is another tricky thing. This example is a college in New Jersey. So this part is the college. I believe the ownership of the college goes out to this road. So this street view, this is looking at this building here, and this building is this one over here. But you can see, I'm sorry, this. This is this one, and then this there. You can see that there's commercial use on the bottom floor, but then there's probably residential use on the floors above. So what do you do with that? You know, it's like, it's a mixture. It's a vertical mixture. And if you wanted to decide what you're going to call it, you have to do some thinking. Do I go with what I think is the predominant use, or do I have a class that's kind of a mix? That kind of a thing. We also have situations where one thing is scattered with another. So this is a desert view. Mostly it's desert vegetation, but we do have some little homes here and there. And the question would be, do you just want to ignore those? It depends on the purpose of your mapping. Like, it's predominantly desert vegetation, and maybe that's what you want to call it, but do you want to acknowledge that there are some houses there? And then if so, would you want to create like a polygon that includes, you know, some of them? Or maybe you want to lump like these guys together down here at the bottom left. So there's some choices, and especially if you're working with a group of people, you need to come to that consensus before everybody starts mapping, because you can have 3 different ways of doing it, and none of them is wrong, but you just want to be consistent and not have your map vary depending on who got that area to map on that particular day.
Mosaic, I'm trying to figure out why.
Oh, the street.
East-west changes.
Yeah, it probably is a mosaic. I think you're right. Yeah. I don't think that's actual on the ground. Yeah. Okay, so next we'll talk about setting boundaries. This is another chance for people who are out in Zoom land to draw if they want to. Like we all know what land looks like, we all know what water looks like, and it should be pretty easy to draw the boundary between them. But we have instances like the ocean, right? So this is, both of these are from New Jersey. This is the Atlantic Ocean. And if you were going to draw a boundary to separate the ocean from the land, it's not as straightforward as you would initially think, right? Because you do have tides. Nicole is drawing one line where she would draw it, and you have to think about that. And if this was going to be a map that might be used for the next couple of years or so, you know, where would you draw that line? So for the folks in the room, so far, we have a line that somebody drew like right about there, all the way back there, which is like, seems pretty far away from the ocean, right? But you can see where's the wet sand, and maybe it's been wet past, and, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I heard once that nobody owns the land between high tide and low tide. I don't know if that's
I
true.
don't know if that's true either. Yeah.
I think it's the law in the UK.
Sorry?
I think it's the law in the UK.
Oh.
Yeah, because it's not always there.
And that was, the other laws were by accident.
Would it be okay to draw the line on the left, picture on the left? On the edge where the lower part of the water is, between the green and the dark green.
Like over in here?
Even where the water covers the sand,
Like
further to the right.
I mean, as an in the moment thing, that would work, but you have to kind of think long term.
Right.
Yeah. Which was a hard concept for me to get.
Yeah.
I should have shared at the beginning. Prior to becoming a librarian, I was a mapper, and a lot of the time my job involved photo interpretation. So yeah, these were some of the kind of tricky things that we had to think about. It's not super straightforward all the time.
Yeah.
The photo on the right includes a different kind of tidal situation where we have mud flats. And, you know, is that land? Is that water? Again, a decision that you would have to make at the start of your project. And then where to draw that land water interface. Somebody on Zoom has kind of gone out around this lighter colored area and decided that's where they would draw the line. There could be arguments for not including that and just, you know, going somewhere else. Again, something to determine before you get going.
What is the purpose of the boundary line? Short answer.
Whoa. What is the purpose of mapping? You know,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, in something like this, I know that, you know, you have water rights, you have states lines, you have all this kind of stuff. International borders usually go like down the middle of a river, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, really just to represent that the fact that there is land and there is water, and you've got to, you know, show it somewhere. But it's absolutely dependent on the needs of the person who is requesting this. They might just be interested in the permanently vegetated areas, and we'll call that land. And you go, okay, we'll call that land.
I just remember like social studies back in junior high where you would have the little legend, and it would be like, this one is swamp, and these are trees, and that kind of stuff. We don't really have that interpretation on the, you know, the Google views.
Right. Boundaries between different types of water can also be tricky. Like, suppose you have a very broad stream that's flowing into a lake, you know, like where do you draw that boundary between broad stream and the start of the lake? That kind of thing. So, yeah. Okay, I need to clear all drawings. This was another opportunity for drawing. I think this is the last one I have. If you were mapping land cover and you wanted to separate trees from residential, that's fine, except, you know, sometimes properties do have trees on their property and they blend into the woods that are beyond. So in a case like this, you might want to have access to something like a parcel map where you can see where the ownership boundaries are. I'm kind of thinking that, you know, I might divide the trees, like along this area. Down here, it's a little trickier because this is an awful lot of trees in that backyard maybe. So I'm not sure exactly where to draw that. But,
Would an height, you know, this is this many feet above sea, and I mean, what is that word?
elevation.
Elevation map.
Mhm.
Would that maybe help?
That could help in this case. If it was like a really steep hillside full of trees, then that might be like, you know what, I don't think this is residential use or something. So yeah, although it could be, but yeah. So changes over time. Obviously, there are natural changes. We talked about the tide a little bit. This is kind of a more ongoing change. This is Cape Cod, Massachusetts. This is the southeast corner. So if you remember that looks like, you know, a finger that's crooked, and we're looking at the first knuckle here. From 1990 to 2023, I got these images off of Google Earth. So quite a bit of change. And one reason why people who are interested in coastlines need to update them frequently, right? Depending on how far in you're zoomed. There's also human-induced changes that we have to think about. So let's talk some of these through. The harvested trees at left, this is from Delaware. You can see texture-wise and maybe color-wise, I think we have some fairly tall trees up in the upper left corner and down here a little bit. It seems like there's shorter trees here in the center left, and then maybe really recently harvested trees, you know, in the bulk of the center and right side of that image. These don't look like trees at this time, but maybe we want to call them trees because we know that's what they're most likely going to come back as, that kind of a thing. This photo on the bottom, you have to account for areas under construction. So this is Menifee, south of Riverside on the way to San Diego, lots of new home construction going on. But you can see like over here and here, probably over here, they've already got the outlines for the roads that they're going to put in. So you might be mapping now, but 6 months from now, that's going to be housing, unless, you know, the developer goes bankrupt or something like that, which also can happen. So you might want to think about a category for these kind of transitional areas if you're mapping it. This example at center and right at the top of the slide, this is called Savage Mill, and it's in Maryland, and it used to be a cotton mill. And it has been repurposed. So now we have a bakery, and we have the dive bar and grill in here, a meeting room and that kind of thing. So again, my thing with computers doing this kind of classification is they could look at this signature and they say, that's a mill, and that's industrial, and they would be right, but they don't know unless they were like checking maybe Google Street View or Google Earth or something like that, that it has been repurposed. And I'm sure you know of other examples, like churches are in all kinds of buildings that used to be something else, for instance, and sometimes churches get converted to apartments, or, you know, there's just all kinds of things where buildings will look the same on the image, but they actually have a different use from what it appears they are when you're looking at
Downtown Riverside has those.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting example up the street here where the church got a tower added. That's a telecommunication.
Oh, really?
Started as a spark.
Yeah, how do you deal with satellite towers that look like trees?
That's a really good question. I was thinking of that as an example to mention, actually, you know, like you could go looking at aerial photographs and figuring out, if you use color infrared, you could tell the fake ones because they're not going to be that red. They're going to be green. So, yeah.
So they don't fool anybody.
Not on the imagery. Sometimes they might fool somebody. I don't know. And this is one of my favorite examples of fun things that you can learn while you are interpreting photographs. So the left picture shows you what school buses look like from the top down. Some have white roofs, some have yellow roofs, some have like 2 vents on the top, some have 1. There's a little guy. At my old job, we were mapping land use in southern Delaware, and my office mate and I kept coming across things that looked like school buses in rural homes, you know. And at first we think, oh, they have a side gig, they're like the school bus driver, you know. But there were just so many of them. We were seeing so many houses that had these school buses, and we're like, what's going on? They can't all be school bus drivers. Does anybody know why there might be school buses on rural properties?
Are you sure it's a school bus?
They're just, yeah. RVs maybe, or
Okay.
is it something that is a vehicle but not a school bus?
These turned out to be school buses because we did
were-
check street
really
view. Yeah, we did check street view.
Oh, boy.
So the next slide will reveal the mystery. Chickens.
I was gonna say chicken coop.
You did the same chicken coop. Yeah, people buy old school buses and convert them into places to raise chickens. So there you go.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have learned nothing else today, now you know. People buy school buses and use them for chickens.
It'd be very secure against predators.
That's true.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end of the workshop, and I do want to share just a little bit about if you were thinking of starting a project where you're doing aerial photo interpretation to extract one of the many types of information you can extract from photos. We touched on some of this before. Really think about what the purpose of what you're trying to do is, and that helps you determine the scope, like what you do need and what you can just overlook, because as you saw, there's so much information on the images, and most likely you don't have unlimited time and unlimited resources, so you really want to get focused on what you're trying to capture. Resources these days, people would probably use a geographic information system, or GIS, in order to do the mapping. You can bring the imagery right into your session, and you can draw on top of it. We would not be using something like zoom annotation on it or anything. You can get real precise and everything like that, and make a map from that. Yeah, time is always a concern too. Think about the degree of accuracy that's needed, whether we're talking about what you call it, like, is it okay to call things a school and leave it at that? Or are you going to need more information down to, like, this is a K-6, private school or something like that. Think about what's the smallest polygon size that you want to allow and the shortest line segment. You can get really inky dinky and like draw around every single little house and stuff, but that's going to just be clutter. It's almost like having the photo in the first place. So you're probably going to want to group things. You have to decide how small is the smallest area that you want to go. And similarly with this level of detail and precision in what you're delineating. I know you've all probably seen like streams that have lots of little curves in them. And is it going to be necessary to capture all those little curves, or are you going to be able to generalize a little bit and still get the point across without having all that extra detail and frankly, machine storage as well, to store all those extra vertices and things in the line that you're drawing. And then think about quality assurance, especially if you've got several people working on the project at the same time. You want to make sure that we're all on the same page as close as you can be. And then kind of looking over the work to make sure that people haven't gone off the rails somewhere, misinterpreted something, or just forgot about one rule or something like that. So to have a good product, you would want to have some kind of double checking going on. I could give a whole nother workshop just on this section of the this workshop, and would be happy to do so if anybody's interested. But real quick, to create a classification, like, are you going to make it residential, commercial, industrial, agriculture, or how are you going to break that down? You know, we've looked at some examples where it's not always clear cut. If you can structure a classification so it's hierarchical, so you might have like residential at the top level, and then underneath that you have single family residential, multifamily residential, high rise, multi-residential or something, have these different categories. That way you can always group up if you need a more general map. But on the other hand, you have to figure out how low in the specificity you want to go. But making it a hierarchical structure works pretty well. As we saw, you might want to account for things that are kind of blended, like having a category that's commercial/residential, for instance, or often we have commercial industrial. I don't know if you've seen those like light industrial parks that have signage shops, but they also have gymnastics and yoga, things like that. So that's kind of a blend that's there too. You might want to create separate layers. So if you're mapping vegetation in one layer, maybe you want to have kind of like an overlay, the equivalent of an overlay that depicts which parts of this vegetation is burned, that kind of thing. And there's another thing that you can do is like use modifiers. So like add an extra number at the end if it's got a particular attribute to it. Like I'm thinking about that desert example that we looked at. Like basically we could call that vacant land, but if there's enough human disturbance in there that we want to call that out, maybe we sometimes populate a fifth column in the code and say like it's vacant, but it's got a significant amount of human disturbance. So there's all kinds of options on how to handle some of the squishy things that we looked at today. And become familiar with the area. It's not cheating to use all the information that's available at your disposal. So existing maps, the documentation, Google Earth and Google Street View are wonderful. If you've got people who are familiar with the area already, go ahead and pick their brains and get out there if you can. Typically what we would do in a mapping project would be kind of look at the photos in a general sense, then take a trip out there and drive some of the major roads and look out the window and figure, oh, that's what this is, and then we can go back and map with more confidence. Anytime we see this signature, we saw what it looked like on the ground that one time, so we're going to guess, that's what's holding across the whole study area. And then once you've finished mapping as best you can, going out there again and then focusing on the things that really have you stumped. Like this could be 3 different things. I don't know. I need to go look at it. And that will increase the accuracy of your map. If you're involved with vegetation mapping, especially, there's something called accuracy assessment, or AA, and that is done by a third party. So somebody who was not involved in the mapping at all, but who knows the vegetation types out there. They will go and take random points on your map and compare what you said it was to what they're seeing on the ground. And that's kind of a standard way of assessing how good a vegetation mapping effort was by the score that it's given by the AA people. Okay, we're almost at the end. I've got a couple of slides for resources, and then there's time for questions and discussion. If you'd like to learn more, there's a tutorial put together by my colleague at Colorado School of Mines that's because it's Colorado School of Mines, it's kind of focused on Colorado and mines, but it does give you some guidance on how to interpret aerial photos more. I found this YouTube video that was quite good. I think it was a professor in Vermont. So she went over some of the things that we've talked about today, but again, different examples and that kind of thing. This is an app that you can put on your phone. It's called MapSwipe, and it gives you Airphoto interpretation experience, but it's also for a good cause. It's to help first responders like the Red Cross and other folks in areas that are undermapped. They've got aerial photos of this, and you just kind of swipe through about 20 photos at a time and tell them, do I see a structure in this photo? Yes or no? And somebody from those organizations will go through it again. But it's just a first pass kind of thing that you can do to help with that. And then there's a couple of other sites where you can learn about the history a little bit. The Smithsonian has a nice description of the history of aerial photography and its interpretation. And the Canadians have something nice there as well. And if you want to find aerial photos, if I've got you so interested now, I want to look at more. Here at UCR Library, we have photos of Riverside in San Bernardino County. The earliest we have is 1938. So that's really cool to look at those for Western Riverside. And it goes up to about 2005. In this guide, there's many that are listed. I have some additional photos that I've acquired in recent years that are in my office. And so if you're looking for a particular year in a particular area in the Inland Empire and you're not seeing it in the guide, you might want to contact me and I can let you know if I have anything extra that we just haven't gotten integrated in the collection yet. Cal State San Bernardino, their Water Resources Institute has a large collection of aerial photos for this area. UC Santa Barbara, they're like the big deal as far as aerial photos go for the state of California. They have a humongous collection. Many of them are available digitally. So if you go to this frame finder, it's a map of California, and they've got little dots corresponding to the center point of the photos that they have in their collection. You can click on a point, and if it's something that they've scanned, you can just go ahead and download it right there. So it's really cool. And it includes some of the photos that we have here for Riverside and San Bernardino counties. This is a US government site where you can download archival imagery. And this last one, I sort of was alerted to recently. It's called the National Collection of Aerial Photography, and it's in Scotland, but it has way more than Scotland in it. They've got some really cool imagery of Europe, like from the 1940s, like when the war was going on and stuff. So that would be fascinating to check out sometime if you're interested. And that's it. So I thank you very much for your attention and for helping me try out some of these new techniques with hybrid workshops and Zoom annotation. And I will stop talking and see if anybody has questions in the room or on Zoom. And we have 2 minutes to spare. Wow. Made it on time. Those of you in the room, if you are interested in taking a look at the photos in the back, feel free to do so. If anybody's interested in a follow-up workshop, either for your organization or just in general, think this might be of interest to more people, kind of follow-up workshops, let me know. I'd be happy to try to put something like that together.